What's up, guys? This is TheKephas. Alright, so we've recently made a lot of videos about my UI, and it's been a lot of fun. We did one on console port where we talked about how I play WoW with the controller. We did one on my HUD using add-ons like ElvUI and others that make up how my screen looks and what you see on my screen, which is always changing, by the way, but nevertheless. And we also made one on Gnome Sequencer, how I play WoW with fewer buttons. But we're going to make another one today because I keep getting asked about it and I thought it'd be fun to make this. What about my camera? How am I doing all this? What's this camera all about? So, today we're going to talk about Action Cam, or better yet, Dynamic Cam, which is the add-on that takes full advantage of Action Cam. And I'm going to show you how I have this set up and how you can set it up too if you want to. So we can fly around here, we'll get off our mount, you'll see that the camera slowly changes, and when we enter combat, you will also notice that, there we go, that things change again. You can see now that the camera's focusing on my enemy, which is really cool, and I can actually have it pivot, so if I'm in combat, it'll always pivot over to whatever enemy I'm using, which is a fun little option you can do. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So we're gonna go ahead and do it again, as you can see. Yeah, so if I look, see, so I tab, target, back and forth. That can get a little dizzying for people, so I'm going to stop doing that. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And so there's a lot of cool settings that you can do with this add-on to give it a sort of like a more immersive and cinematic feel, if that's something that you're going for. And it can be very, very useful to have it set up this way. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll show you how I have it set up. Now, a lot of people like to ask about my profile, if I can just share my profile for Dynamic Cam, and I cannot, because Dynamic Cam, for whatever reason, does not allow for profile sharing. So unfortunately, we are going to have to walk through this one little step at a time here, and you'll see what I mean. I'm going to try my best to walk you through how this add-on works, how to set it up, and what each function does, or at least the functions that I use, so that you can get an idea of how I have mine set up, and hopefully an idea for how you can set yours up if you want it to be a little bit different from mine. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is we're going to open up Dynamic Cam, and that is done through add-ons. You just go down. These aren't in alphabetical order, by the way. It drives me crazy. I don't know why, but I'm not a mod author. I appreciate the work that people do, but I don't get it. But anyway, it's right here, Dynamic Cam. So, okay, this is the Dynamic Cam menu. It's a lot. There's a lot here that I don't understand, and so I'm not going to be able to explain like everything that's going on here. But yeah, so I'll do my best, and I'll show you the settings that I use. So this first tab up here, this is the standard settings. And so this is kind of like your setting for all situations by default, your default settings. You can go into situations and sort of make micro adjustments for each unique situations, and we'll go over all those here in a second. But let's go over the standard settings first, because these are the main things that are going to matter for how your camera looks. Okay, so mouse zoom, I leave all these by default. It's just, you know, your camera distance, it's set to max. You can do camera zoom speed, so when you zoom in the camera in and out, it'll move faster or slower. You can do that. Zoom increments, the amount of the amount of distance that's covered with each tick of your scroll wheel. So that's kind of what that's all about. I leave all those by default. Mouse look, again, leave this by default. You can look down here. It'll have a help section. The mod author was very courteous to add a help section to try and help explain what these different areas do, and so hopefully that can help you out as well. Sometimes I found it to be very helpful. Other times I'm still a little bit confused. But yeah, it's a very sophisticated add-on. So horizontal offset. Now this is the, you know, if you look at my character here, this is where my character is like off to the left a little bit. That's what horizontal offset does. So if I set it to 0, then you'll see that I'm back in the middle. Okay, so I'm using OPI to keep opening this up through a macro, if you're wondering. So yeah, and so if I do negative, so if I do like -2, then now I'm over here to the right side. So that's like, you can actually have yourself to the right if you want to, for whatever reason. So that's what you can do. And then obviously the higher the number, the further off screen you'll go. I mean, you can take yourself all the way off screen if you want to, if you really want to do that. I don't think you'd want to, but you can. For me personally, I think that 1 +1, which is to the left, is the sweet spot. I'm just slightly off to the left. I don't want to be too far off where it's a little bit like, you know, disorienting, but like off by just a little bit for me is nice. I could even probably do 0.5 or around between 0.5 and 1. It just a little bit off to the left is what works for me. So that's how I have that set up. And that's really all I do there. Remember, you can make adjustments in different situations. So we'll go over that later. So vertical pitch, this is a little bit harder to explain, but this is kind of like where the camera is angled behind you. Okay, so like if you look, it sucks because you can't make these adjustments while also seeing the screen because of the Blizzard options screen. And just one of those things. I wish add-ons just would all use their own thing, but I don't know. The little rant. Let's not go there. So pitch, if you look over on the left or right, you'll see the camera move. So I have it by default set to 4.5. And so if I move it, you can see it going up and down. And so it has to do with the angle of your character. And sometimes it moves depending on where you're at. Like if I move the camera up because the ground's there, the ground will clash. Yeah, so you can see it kind of moves up a little bit. And then if you go to 0, then it's off, and so it's where it's at by default. You won't notice a whole lot of a difference, but you will notice it at times, especially the more you zoom out, you'll notice it even more. I like to keep it by default at 0.45, and basically what that does is it moves me a little bit lower to the bottom of the screen so that the camera feels like it's more at my back and not over my head. I'm not looking at the floor as much, I'm looking out at the world. And so it's basically like floor to world ratio is a good way to think of it. And this way I'm getting more of the world and less of the floor, and I kind of like that. Now if you're using like big UIs, this may not be that appealing to you, but since, as you can see, my UI is incredibly minimal, I have a lot of things hidden, it works out really well. And it's also nice when you're fighting bosses with this setting, you can see more of them, which is nice. You're not just seeing toes all the time, so it can be very nice for that as well. So that's what the dynamic pitch does. Okay, so let me open that back up. These other two settings down here, I don't mess with them. I don't know what they do. I don't mess with them. I don't bother them. So yeah, I won't even go over those. So target focus, I keep this off by default. And so what this does, I'll explain it because we will mess with it later. So target focus is whenever you focus the target, the camera pivots to focusing towards the direction of that target. And that's when I was in combat, you saw me doing that. So there are a lot of people that would make them motion sick. You can turn it off. You just turn off target focus. If there are any situations that have it on, you can just turn it off. And so that way you don't have to worry about it. But it is nice. And the thing is like, so if you look here, we'll go over it later, but target focus, the main ones are vertical strength and horizontal strength. You can set these to be very low, so like 0.1 or 0.2, and then it'll still do it, but only slightly. And so that might help you out if you do get motion sick, where it's not like jarring back and forth or whatever, where it's just slightly moving for you. So that way you still get a little bit of the feel, but it's not too much. That's actually what I've done to make it feel a little bit better. So 0.1, it'll just barely pivot and you kind of still get that feel. So that's something that you can do. 0.2 will make it a little bit faster, so it's up to you. But you can have it go way up and it's just like, it's really jarring, but yeah, whatever you want to do. So that's what that is. Now let's go into situations and I will try to explain each of these and I'll show you how I have the main ones for me set up. Okay, so this drop down here, you can see the enable. The enable is for each situation, so you can turn off any of these situations. So like if I went down to I don't know, if I wanted to say gathering, I can have the camera do something when I'm gathering. I can turn this on or off by hitting enable. So that's kind of cool. So if you have a setting that you don't want to use, you can turn it off. And then if it's off, then it will rely on your default settings, I believe is how it would work. So that's something to remember. Now, there are some more settings in here that we need to go over. Now, under the situation controls, these are set by default by the mod itself, and they basically determine like the I don't know if it's the Lua or the coding, the command that lets the add-on know that this situation is happening, therefore activate the camera for that situation. So this is where you do that. So if you know how to do this stuff, you could probably do all kinds of cool things in here. But that's basically how that works. So most of these situations, I don't have any of the main settings changed. Most of them just use the same as these settings, and that's what the first tab is. It's the same as this, and there's only a couple that have some changes. Okay, so the main thing is situation actions, and you'll see that most of the time I have these two off. So rotation, I'll show you real quick if I can go find a mailbox, because that's actually one where I use this. So if I can fly around for a second, I got my mini map up here, and I'll show you, because I like to try and show what it looks like. So there's a mailbox here. So if I go up to this mailbox and I click on it, you'll see what it does. The camera rotates, and now I'm over on the right side, and it does this cool little rotation thingy, and it just looks really nice. You can have a setting like that where it'll rotate for you, and like whether you're talking to an NPC, you can set it up that way for gathering. I mean, there's all kinds of situations where you might want to do that, so that's also pretty cool. But for the most part, in like the vast majority of situations, I'm not going to be using rotation, and I'm also not going to be using fade out UI. I might use that for like when I'm on a flying, not a flying map, but like a flight path. It might be useful then. Maybe there's like a situation where I would use something like that, but for the most part, you might leave that off, but you never know. It just depends on what you want to do. The main thing that you're going to look at is zoom / view. And for the most part, the main two settings are the top two here. The rest of these I'm not going to mess with. And I also don't tend to change the zoom type. You can do set, out, in, or range, and I just leave it to set. It'll tell you what each of these do. I haven't messed with that too much. And then don't slow. It basically means that it'll switch zoom when you move from one situation to another as fast as possible if you have this checked on. I turn it off because the first thing I like to do is set my zone transition speed. And so what this does is by default it's usually set to 1, which means that when you go from one situation to another, it'll adjust your zoom pretty quickly so that it's done. I like to slow it down so that it's not as jarring, and that way it'll kind of float out or float inward when I change situations, and it feels a little bit like less distracting and less jarring. So 2 and 3 tend to work better depending on the situation. So generally I keep it on 2 or 3. I probably would settle on 2 for the vast majority of situations, but for city I do have it set to 3, just messing around. The zoom value is what's really important, okay? And so for me, I have it up really close because when I'm in a city, I like the feel of being in the city. If I set the zoom out too far, then it's not quite as immersive. And so when I'm walking around the city or running around, I like to feel that I'm close up, because I a lot of times you're in cities, they're a little bit more crowded anyways. So having it closer feels a little bit nicer. And when I go inside of a city, inside of a building, it'll zoom up a little bit more. So if you go here now, this is blue, city priority. Now I'm in city indoors, okay? And so that's what's going on here. So the reason why city is blue and city indoors is green is because city is still active because I am still in a city, but city indoors is taking priority. If you look to the right of the situation, it'll say priority 1, priority 11, priority 0. And what that means, the higher the number on your priority, will determine if that one takes precedence over the other one. So because city is a priority of 1 and city indoors is a priority of 11, city indoors overrides city because it has a higher priority. And so you can adjust that if I can get rid of Oops. Well, that's fine. You can adjust that by going over here to situation controls, and at the top here is priority, and you can change the number here. So if you want something to take priority over something else, that's where you adjust that. So yeah, so we're indoors right now, and it's the same settings. Everything's the exact same, except now zoom value is 4 instead of 5. So I move in ever so slightly when I'm inside of a building in a city, and it just kind of moves in a little bit because now we are inside. We're a little bit more cramped, and so just a slight change like that, it does make a lot of a difference. So that's zooming the camera in and out without me ever having to do it myself, and it just feels very natural. So, and of course I can still zoom in and out if I want to, if for whatever reason I have the option to do that. So that's cool as well. And then if I change my situation, it'll automatically put it back for me. So that's basically how that works. So but yeah, so like you can set it to different settings here. Like I said, we're back now in city. We're city indoor. No, we're city now. Back to city. So you can see I have it set to zoom 5. So I'll show you here. We'll switch it to like 7, and then we'll make this 1, and you can see the difference. We'll fix it here in a second. So when you make the change, it doesn't do it until you go in and out of the zone again. So we'll go back indoors to reset it, and then we'll go back outside and you'll see the difference. So you can see now the camera adjusted a little bit faster, and I'm a little bit further out, and that's basically how that works. Now, the fast movement, like the fast camera adjustment, you won't notice as much when it's such a small change in zoom. But when you're like, if you're like zoomed out 25 and you zoom into like 5 and you have that set to 1, it's very fast. So that's something that it's when it's a lot more jarring. But yeah, I think I'm actually going to settle on 2 for most things, and I'm going to move this back to 5. So that way it's fixed. Okay, so that's the city. Then we move into world, and this is when we're not in the city. So this is like pretty much anywhere else. And so that's why it's set to a priority of 0. So this would be like out in the Isle of Dorn, for example. So this is the setting here. Again, we have this zone transition set to 3. I'm going to move it to 2. And since we are out in the world, we have it set to 8. Sorry, I was really close to my microphone there. So I'll show you. You kind of already saw it, but I'll still show it. So that way when we go out here, we'll zoom, we'll go out, and we'll get off our mount. And when I go into Isle of Dorn, here we go, you can see that, yeah, we moved out just a little bit. There it goes. Yeah. So now we're out a little bit further. And so now we're out in the world. We want to see more of the world. We want to kind of get more of a feel of our environment. And so having it zoomed out a little bit more is very helpful. Okay. So that's the idea there. And then of course you've got world indoors. And so that's when you're inside of the building. When you're not in the city, you can set that up. World combat, and so this is one. So combat is when you engage in an encounter when you're out in the world. So for me, I zoom it out more to like 15, and then the other major change that I make is the horizontal offset. When I'm in combat, I set it to 0, and that way I'm in the middle of the screen, and that gives me kind of a more tactical like awareness of where I'm at. So I become the center of the screen, and the action is easier to keep track of. Okay, so target focus is now on, and this is the thing we were talking about where it pivots from one enemy to another depending on what you're looking at, what you have targeted. And so I have that to set to 0.15, and so this is for when you're in combat out in the world, and this is how that's going to work. Okay, so I'm not going to like demonstrate everything because I kind of did earlier and it would take a long time. So that's combat. Now we'll go over dungeon stuff here in a little bit, but we're going to go over mounting now because like mounting is a little bit difficult. So mounted is really confusing because of how it works. So there are different situations for mounting. So there's only a couple I have turned on. So mounted any primarily is what I think of as ground mounts. Okay. And it's set to 100 priority. Anything else is going to take precedence over mounting any. So basically, if I'm skywriting, it'll switch to that one if I'm on a skywriting mount. Okay, that's kind of the idea there. So you can have all kinds of different situations here for different like mount situations. And like I said, it's really confusing. I'm still trying to get a handle on it. But from what I've gathered, so you can do mounting any, that's any mount. So that's what this setting would be. You You can do mounting only flying mount, so any mount that's registered as a flying mount. Mounting flying mount plus airborne, flying mount plus airborne plus skywriting. You see what I'm saying? So like it's adding extra little conditions to each one. That way you can kind of control your camera for each of these situations. It's just a matter of figuring out which situation is appropriate for what you're trying to like set up. And that's the confusing part. So for me, the way I have it set up is I have mounting, that's when I'm on the ground, and then one for when I'm skywriting. That's basically it. So, for example, if I hop on my Traveler's Tundra Mammoth, you'll see the camera will zoom out just a little bit, okay? And then again, if I hop on my skywriting, it kind of pivots a little bit, and then it's zooms out just a little bit more. When I start flying, it'll change. And now I'm back to the center. And the reason why I do this is so that way I can kind of keep track of where I am, especially when I'm like dragon riding. I feel like it's nice to have my character in the center, especially if I'm like doing a race or something like that. So I like to be in the center for that. So that's why I have it set up like that. And then of course I get off and I go back down. So that's kind of the idea there. And then of course there's one for Druid form. That is a separate one entirely. And that will change the camera for when you're on your Druid mount, which is something that you want to set up because by default it's very broken. So it requires some different settings entirely. And it can be a mess. So that's the idea there. And then of course you can do one for Soar. So if you're an evoker, you can set that up as well. So yeah, so if I look back here, yeah, so I have one for mounted any, that's when I'm on the ground. Mounted airborne plus skywriting, that's when I'm flying. And then Druid, same thing, that's for when I'm in Druid form. And then of course, Drakthir Soar, that's basically the same as dragon riding. So mounted any, we'll look at it just so you can see how I have it set up. You do have to make an adjustment for horizontal when you're on your mount because you will, when you hop on your mount, you'll be further to the left. And so you have to kind of like make an adjustment. So, or you'll be less to the left. I'm sorry. So that's why I have it set to 2 for that one. And then when you're zooming, I have it set to 10. So it's just a little bit more zoomed out from when you're not on a mount. Okay. Now for when you're flying, the mounted airborne, skywriting, Druid and Drakthir are all set the exact same way because I wanted them to feel the same way. So I have it zoomed out to 25. And then under situation settings, I have horizontal offset set to 0. And I have vertical pitch also set to 0. And so the idea is that I'm just in the middle of the screen and that way I can keep track of where I am. So, and it's zoomed out more so I can see more of the ground in the area that I'm in. So that's the idea there. Now, that's flying, and that's, again, like it's a little bit confusing, but once you mess around with it a little bit, you can kind of get a feel for what each situation is for. Taxi, that's when you're on a flying mount, like on a flight path, you know? And so this one, I'm basically using the default settings, a little bit of an offset to the right. So when I'm on a flying, on a taxi, I go over to the right. And then under situations, I have the UI fading out, so it'll fade that out. And then the zoom view is a little bit closer, but it's set to 15. And it's just like a cool cinematic feeling. Like I said, this is the default settings. I didn't even change this. And most of these down here are. So vehicle, same thing. This is when you're like in some type of a vehicle, like a combat vehicle, you know, zoomed out. And then set to 0, so it's like a mount. I like to have it in the middle because it's usually when you're in a vehicle, it's for a combat situation. Hearthstone teleport. This is also set by default. You can do an offset if you want to. I have it set to 0, and then I have this is a situation where I fade out the UI, and then I do a rotation. So that spins around while I'm using my Hearthstone, and then you can set up a zoom. You know. And so that's, again, that's by default. Now, one of the things I've noticed here is under situation, some of the Hearthstones don't work. And I think it's because the spell is not included. So I think these are like the item numbers for the Hearthstone or the different toys. So if your toy isn't working, I haven't tried it yet, but I think you could probably just put the spell ID or item ID in here and it should work then, I think is how it should work. So that's something I still haven't messed with yet. I don't like to get into code too much because I don't know what I'm doing. So, but yeah, there are some Hearthstones, some newer ones that aren't working. Next up is fishing. You know, all these AFK, fishing, pet battles, all of mine are set to default, just whatever the dynamic cam had by default. I don't really mess with those too much, but you can go in and you can do all kinds of stuff. You can set up one for gathering. NPC interactions, another one that's kind of cool, but I use dialogue UI and that add-on does that, so I have that one turned off. Annoying spells, not quite sure what that one does. And then, of course, you can actually have a unique setting for dragon racing, which is really cool. It's cool that they added that in. So that's pretty much all the miscellaneous stuff. The last thing is when you're in dungeons. So dungeons and raids, I have all the same. And dungeons, raids, PvP, they're all the same setting, okay? And so there's out of combat and in combat. And you'll see it says combat and then indoor, outdoor. I basically have them all the same. So in dungeons, what I do is I'll just click on this one. I have the zoom set to 15, so zoomed out a little bit. Basically the same settings I have for combat. And then I have the horizontal offset to 0. When I'm in a dungeon, I like the game to feel as normal, as like traditional as possible. So I still have the vertical pitch, the vertical pitch set. So that way it's still at my back because it is nice even in dungeons. But I have the offset turned off, so that way I'm not disoriented when I'm like in a large scale battle. It is a little bit nicer to be in the middle for that tactical, like traditional WoW feel. So in dungeons and raids, I have all that stuff turned off just by activating the event and then setting horizontal to 0 and then setting a default zoom value. And so that's for those. The only other thing I do like to use in combat is I do like to have the target focus on, and then I have it on with a very low setting. And that's just because like it's very useful for me as a visually impaired person. When I see the camera pivot in a direction, I know where to look to find whatever I'm trying to target. So that's very helpful. Or if something, targets me and the game automatically targets it, I know that, hey, the camera is pivoting and something over there is coming at me. So that's also very nice. So I like to have that on, but always remember, you can turn any of these off, so you don't have to use any of this stuff. But that's basically how I have everything set. So everything's kind of set the same exact way with some minor changes in there, and it works out pretty well. So yeah, that's a lot to go over. Like I said, I can't share my profile, unfortunately. So that's something that you would have to like set up yourself. But hopefully, I know it's a lot. I'm going to try to timestamp every situation. So if you watch this and you're trying to go back over it, hopefully you can find a timestamp that'll get you to the part you're trying to walk through. But hopefully this video helped explain it to you. Man, that's really nice sunset. But yeah, real immersive. So yeah, that's how I have mine set up. I'd love to know what you think about it in the comments below. If you use dynamic cam or whatever, feel free to go through and set it up. And if this video helped you out, I'd love to know about it. So if it did, don't forget to like it, share it, and let me know what you think about it in the comments below. With all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is TheKephas. Until next time.